David Day, Vicksburg Daily News, here with Warren County Emergency Management Director John Elfer. Director Elfer, we had an incident yesterday at Walmart that was initially reported as an active shooter. It turned out to be something else. But it raised the question, what should someone do if they find themselves in an active shooter situation? I know you're uniquely qualified on this.
Yeah, so let me start out by saying I'm not going to comment on an ongoing investigation that I wasn't involved in. That's a law enforcement, area that Vicksburg Police Department, the Warren County Sheriff's Office, and other agencies that were actually involved in that. So I'm not going to speak on their behalf or get into their lane. But in general, I think.
But now you have some unique qualifications.
I do. I spent 18 and a half, 19 years in law enforcement. Part of my additional duties, in addition to patrol, I was a firearms instructor, less lethal instructor, but I was also a law enforcement active shooter instructor. We trained other law enforcement officers on how to respond to an active shooter. This became extremely, it got on the radar in the 90s. Now, active shooters have been going on for many, many years. Okay, you go way, way back. So it's not anything new. You had the 1966 incident in Texas. You've had several incidents. Obviously, schools were the focus between 2010 and 2013, I believe. I'm getting this correct. There were about 160 incidents of active shooting just in the United States. Several hundred people were killed. There's been a lot of studies on it. So law enforcement realized, especially after Columbine, that we had to change the way we respond. And I'm not going to go specifically into what our particular tactics are, but we no longer wait for SWAT teams. The initial officer or two officers will make entry if it is an active shooter, and they will deal with the problem. So we've seen a lot of these. Folks out there have seen these things on live television. Dallas, Texas was a big one. Where several law enforcement officers were killed. There have been several over the years that have gotten a lot of media attention, the Methodist Church in South Carolina being one of them. So it's not anything new, but we did realize that we had to change our tactics. So that's how I got involved in active shooter awareness, active shooter training, primarily for law enforcement. But our focus shifted. We realized that at some point we needed to educate civilians, non-gun toters, non-folks that are in security or law enforcement or military, on how to survive these active shooters, because people simply did not know what to do. We spent a lot of time focused on the school environment, but the majority of active shooter incidents occur at the workplace. And you break it down, more and more we're seeing active shooter incidents occur in worship, churches. They still occur in schools. I think the schools are a little bit stronger, harder targets now. Homeland Security has a very robust active shooter program, along with some other programs that are out there, and they're all fairly much the same, with just a few differences. So when we talk about active shooter response, the law enforcement piece, that's a whole separate issue. But as far as civilians go, you basically have three options, and Homeland Security has changed some of the wording, but basically it's run, hide, or fight, or escape, avoid, deny.
Run, hide, fight. That's a good way to remember it.
So, and I may have had to escape, avoid backwards, but anyway. So, run, hide, fight. If you're involved in an active shooter, and let's define what an active shooter is. An active shooter is someone or some people, because there have been incidents that had more than one individual, that is actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill as many people as they can. Generally speaking, it's going to be in an area, either confined space, like a mall or a school or an office building, or an open area, like a park, roadway, football field, any of that. So it can happen in either location. So the first thing that we encourage people is to get away from the shooter. Run. But to run, you got to know what? Or escape, you have to know what? You have to know where to go. The closest exit may be behind you. So we always want people to be walking around, not on the phone, not texting, not Facebooking, but have your head up and be paying attention. Especially if you go into somewhere that you're not familiar with. Most of these department stores, most of these grocery stores will have exits in the rear. Some are marked, some are not. It's very important that you're familiar with the environment that you're in. Now, it's not always an option to run. Your best option, especially if you're in a multi-tiered building where you don't want to, and the shooting is happening below you, you certainly don't want to evacuate into the killing field. So we encourage people to hide. Now, a hide location can be in a bathroom, it could be in an office. A lot of facilities have designated hide locations where they've reinforced the doors. They've have some equipment in there where if the door doesn't have a lock on it, you can at least barricade the door. You have to think outside the box. Use furniture, use tables, use chairs, whatever you can do to get the door shut. Most of these active shooting incidents are over in a few seconds. Most of the time, the violator is going to determine the outcome. Okay? Either he's going to commit suicide, they're going to give up, or they're going to be dealt with by law enforcement and either taken into custody or other. There are a few instances where civilians or other non-law enforcement officers have gotten involved and stopped the individual from what they were doing. But if you can get into a hide location, out of sight of the violator, 9 times out of 10, if they can't get that door open, they're going to the next one. They're looking for soft, easy targets because they know it's not going to be too long and they're either going to be killed or they're going to be taken into custody. Now, there are a few instances where the individual escaped but was later captured. Those are few and far between. So, run, hide. Those are your first 2 options. Your third and final option as a last resort is to fight. Okay? Now, you have to muster up whatever internal courage that you have. Okay? We're all wired differently. Is it possible that if you fight with someone that is armed that you're going to be injured? It's highly likely. But in my opinion, I would rather take my chances in an attempt to survive the incident by fighting back than knowing I'm going to die and just being executed. But that's a mindset you have to develop. So run, hide, fight as a last resort. Now you might say, well, I don't have a gun. Well, you don't necessarily need a gun. Improvised weapons. Scissors, a fire extinguisher is a great improvised weapon, and people where guns are not allowed oftentimes get a fire extinguisher and have it near their work area. You can spray someone with it. It'll cause their nose and their eyes to close and interrupts their breathing just long enough where you can escape. You have to be creative with it, but you have to plan these things long before the incident, okay? So, talking about firearms. Have firearms used by or introduced by civilians saved lives? Absolutely. But conversely, they've also compounded the situation, okay? These incidents are very dynamic. They change. No 2 are exactly the same. There's no cookie cutter plan. And that's what I tell a lot of these folks, especially in government, where they want an A, B, C, D plan. It may be A, F, G, W. You have to be flexible. I'm not going to say have a gun or not have a gun. What I'm going to say is if you decide you're going to arm yourself with a firearm, you need to have some training. And law enforcement officers and military, we get a lot of training. A civilian that just goes and buys a gun and never goes to the range or never takes a class can be a recipe for disaster. So I'm not going to say do it, and I'm not going to say don't do it. I'm just going to say if you do it, be responsible about it. And there's several local instructors throughout the state of Mississippi that the Department of Public Safety is authorized to teach these classes, and the NRA or whatever program that they're teaching. And I would also encourage people, if they do decide to take a class, to do some homework, check around, ask around about the instructor. They're not all created equal.
Run, hide, fight.
Run, hide, fight.
John, thank you so much for that detailed information. For the Vicksburg Daily News, David Day reporting.